Hi, everybody. Greetings from Dayton, Ohio, where the sun is shining, and we are deep into Lent. Well, not deep, but Lent has begun. So Tom has a story to you from Luke chapter 13.
So this is the story. At that very hour, some Pharisees came to him and said, "Get away from here, for Herod is seeking to kill you." And Jesus said to them, "Go and tell that fox Herod, for me, that I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day, my work is done. And yet, today, tomorrow, and the next day, I must move on to Jerusalem, for it is not possible for a prophet to be killed outside Jerusalem." Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that stones the prophets who were sent to you and kills those who are your prophets. How often have I desired to gather your children, and like a hen gathers her brood under her wings, but you are not willing. So I tell you, you will not see me again until that day when you say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord."
And that's the end of this story. I'm always
end of
waiting.
this story.
I think I'm always waiting for the next line. After that blessing. Okay, so back to the beginning. The story starts.
This is a story full of puzzles.
Yeah.
And
All right. Well,
things.
the first puzzle to me is at the beginning. So some Pharisees come and they warn Jesus. They tell him, "Get out of the city because Herod wants to kill you," which is a little surprising because we tend to think of the Pharisees as the bad guys in the gospel, but here that doesn't seem to be the case. It's on his side. Or you want to talk about that a little bit? And also, who was this Herod who wants to kill Jesus? I know there were a couple of Herods floating around in ancient times, and what was his role and why would he want to kill Jesus?
Okay, well, it's Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, who died in what we now would call 4 BC. So this is the same Herod who killed John the Baptist. And so he is, this Herod is fully capable of killing prophets who are, a threat to his reign. So that would be the reason why the Pharisees would come. And the Pharisees in Luke, and in all the Gospels really, but especially in Luke, are often quite positive characters with whom Jesus is engaged in dialogue, sometimes conflict about the interpretation of the law. But the Pharisees were essentially a group of people who were serious about religion. And so Jesus was encountering them and talking with them about things that they both cared about. And so their coming and warning him is part of the characterization of the Pharisees that is often quite positive. So there are other places like 7:36 and 11:37 and 14:1 that have positive vibes in relation to the Pharisees.
Okay.
So this isn't the only place.
Good. Okay. Jesus responds by saying, "Go and tell that fox," which is a reference to Herod. It's an interesting metaphor, I guess. What would that have meant to people? What would people have thought when they heard Herod called a fox?
Well, in the traditions of Israel, the fox was a kind of crafty, tricky animal that couldn't be trusted. So it's not a positive characterization, but it's also reflects the politics of the first century. And you tell that fox, that crafty, manipulative character.
And then Jesus says twice, he repeats this interesting phrase, today, tomorrow, and the next day. Yeah, today, tomorrow, and the next day. I mean, should we take?
First time it's the third day, and then the second time it's the next day, right? Well, it is something that it's first of all his message to Herod. I'm going to complete my work, and my work is to be finished on my way up to Jerusalem. And so the second time, it is a reference to, I have to continue my journey. So I'm going to do my work here, and then I'm going to go on my journey to Jerusalem. So I've got to get to Jerusalem. And the reason is a passion prophecy. I have to get there because it's not possible for a prophet to be killed outside Jerusalem. So he is in effect prophesying that he's going to Jerusalem knowing that he's going to be killed there.
Yeah. And he does, this kind of poignant lament, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. What's the sense, as you imagine Jesus saying that? What are kind of the emotions behind that? How could we, if somebody was telling this story, what might they think about as they tell this part of the story?
Yeah, think about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD by the Romans at the end of the Jewish-Roman War. Luke is writing his gospel sometime in the 80s, 20 some years, 15 to 20 years after the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the Jewish war. So his audiences were full of that memory and of the lament over Jerusalem. So it's a lament that is, in Jesus' context, is a prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem. And in Luke's time, that prophecy has been fulfilled in the destruction of Jerusalem. So there's no greater lament than the lament over the loss of Jerusalem and of the temple.
So this lament begins with Jesus repeating the word Jerusalem, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. Then he describes it as the city that kills prophets. Do we have a sense? I mean, what prophets would have been killed there? Who might he have been referring to?
Yeah, well, there are specific stories of that. The first is Uriah, who was killed by Jehoiakim. That's in Jeremiah 26. And Zechariah is killed in 2 Chronicles 24. There's the story in the Apocrypha of the martyrdom of Isaiah, who was sawn in two with a wood saw. So all of those martyrdoms happened in Jerusalem. The only stoning that I can identify is the stoning of Stephen, which was after Jesus' death, but would have made sense to Luke's audience as a messenger who was stoned. So those are the specifics of that.
So then after that phrase, there's this beautiful comparison that he gives of himself to a hen. He said, how often would I have gathered you like a hen
Gather
gathers,
your children.
yeah, like a hen gathers her brood under her wings.
Yeah.
Which is it's a beautiful agricultural metaphor, but it's also a feminine metaphor for Jesus. Right. So that's fairly unusual, but don't want that to go by unnoticed. But then he says, but you are not willing. So it sounds like, he wants to care for his people, but they're not willing to be cared for. What are they not willing to do? Not listen to his teachings, any specific teachings they're not listening to?
Well, I think the background of this is the destruction of Jerusalem, and that Jesus had come to Jerusalem and was advocating nonviolence, was advocating not making war against the Romans. At his trial, the people chose Barabbas, who was a revolutionary or an insurrectionist. And so what's in the background is the choice that the people of Israel made to go to war. And that Jesus was, throughout his ministry, in the stories in Luke and in Matthew and Mark also, was doing good for Gentiles, was seeking to bring peace, and that is reflected in all the stories of the Pilate trial, in the choice of Barabbas, so that the people chose the way of war and insurrection.
Yeah, and then he concludes that statement with, well, it's not the final conclusion, but he says, your house is left to you, which is a rather strange thing, saying.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It's often what happens there is a translation problem. And it's a difficult word in Greek, that the basic meaning is to leave or to let go. And in this case, I think a better translation is abandoned. Your house is abandoned. And it's a reference both to, again, the destruction of Jerusalem, that the temple was abandoned, was left, but it's also it's a prophecy of what will happen in the future. And Luke's audiences knew that prophecy had been fulfilled. Your house has been abandoned.
As I'm thinking about it, and that certainly makes sense, but it also occurs to me, it's a little bit like, I tried to teach you the way to go, but you haven't followed it. You weren't willing to listen to my teachings and obey my teachings. And so, the outcome of that is a war that destroys everything. But it's kind of like he's saying, okay, it's up to you. Go your way. Your house is left to you. Your house, meaning, the city of Jerusalem, okay, is yours. I don't know. That's just another way I sort of hear that.
Well, it's a translation.
It's a translation,
issue,
yeah.
So I think it's better translated as
your house is abandoned.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll go with abandoned. And then there is this kind of very last thing is this prophetic thing about you won't see me until the time comes when you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, which is we're quite familiar with in our Eucharistic liturgy. You want to comment anything on that?
Well, it's first of all a reference to the triumphal entry, that they will not see him again, that is the Pharisees and Herod, until he comes into the city of Jerusalem as on a donkey and to the praise of the people. It also has allusions to the second coming, to Jesus coming, as he frequently says at the trial, coming on the clouds of heaven, seeing the Son of Man coming. But I think the immediate reference here is to the triumphal entry into Jerusalem that is celebrated on Palm Sunday.
So this story is really pointing forward to the triumphal entry, to his passion, and then to his resurrection / second coming.
Yeah.
Very prophetic story. All right, any connections you want to make with this story with regard to ministries of peace and justice today? Certainly seems to have
This is a saying, a series of sayings on Jesus on his journey up to Jerusalem. And the implication of the story is that he knows that what awaits him is confrontation and martyrdom. And the reason is his advocacy for peace and the desire of the people for war, for insurrection. And so he is actively seeking to turn the thoughts and minds of his listeners to peace rather than war. And the tendency, and we see this tendency now in Russia, in the United States, with our war in Iraq, with our war in Vietnam, we think the war is going to solve our problems. And so the implication of Jesus' ministry is the war doesn't solve our problems. And it leads to disaster. So I think that's the dominant message that is present in all the Gospels. Jesus is a nonviolent Messiah who advocates nonviolence.
Well, I think the question of war is certainly on all of our hearts and minds and in our prayers, more this week than perhaps it has been in past weeks. So with all of you out there, we thank you for joining us, and we join you in your prayers that this war will cease and not escalate. God bless you.
God's blessing on the people of Ukraine, on all those who are involved in this war, which is such a tragic development.